Hey guys, how's it going? Today we're going to be talking about 5 Ackie Monitor Taming do's and don'ts, so let's get to it and we'll jump in. It's going to just be a mixture of the two. It's not going to be 10. That's a little bit more than I can handle, guys, but let's get into it. Here's your 5 do's and don'ts. So we're starting off with a don't at number 5, don't force handle. A great example of this is the baby male I have from my first ever clutch. I've had to force handle him a couple times. I kind of did that a little bit to test how things would go, and they haven't gone too well, guys. And I'll show an example of that over top of this video of how he reacts versus how some of my adults react and such like that. They just do not vibe well with force handling. Now, I don't think a lot of reptiles do too well with force handling as a taming method, but Ackies, especially when they're babies, they are very untrusting. I've talked about this so many times previously in other videos, but they really are skeptical about everything. And if you're just going in there, kind of grabbing them, forcing them to be in your hands, they're not gonna really like you too well. The good news is if you had to do some force handling for some reason or whatever, you probably can get over that when they become adults because they become more trusting, more bold and curious. Again, I've talked about this before, so it's not the end of the world if you did some force handling. I'm not overly worried about the baby male in this case because I do think he'll come around eventually, and I'm gonna start working to get by this force handling. But the number one thing you can do to really not earn your Ackie Monitor's trust and really put a divide between you two and make that whole taming process so much harder is force handling, so don't do that. All right, guys, let's move on to number 4. We're coming at you with a do at number 4, and that's do be present in their enclosure. Now, I said this so many times in the past too, but presence is the best way to your Akkie's heart, especially when young. You don't want to force handle, but you do want to be in their environment as much as possible. The number one tip I can give for this is when you go about being present, you want to do it for longer periods versus frequency. So I'd rather you go ahead and be in their enclosure a half hour to an hour every other day than being there for 15 minutes every day. You want them to have to deal with you and interact with you. It's very easy, especially as a baby, for them to avoid you for 50 minutes versus an hour or so. So definitely put in the time. The more you do this, the more they'll come around and the taming process will be a lot easier. So try to do this as much as you can. To touch on if you got an adult Ackie, because I usually always talk about these things in the context of a baby since they're a lot more finicky with this stuff. But adult Ackies, this process should be a lot quicker. I would still do the presence thing, let them come to you, but they'll be a lot more curious, so it's not going to take as long with an adult Ackie versus a baby Ackie. So if you're working with an adult Ackie, you're going to get a lot of benefits off of that. Before moving on to number 3, I do just want to kind of define what presence means when doing this with an Ackie, and that's just existing in the environment. It's important though that you do some fiddling with stuff in the enclosure though. You want to show that you can go in there and do stuff in the enclosure without always touching them and grabbing them. That way they're not always stressed when you open up the enclosure that they're about to get grabbed. It shows that you can exist in the same environment without always having to interact. But it is important to be moving things around, doing other things, and at the same time it is important to just be kind of laying your hand in there. That's what you want to do to get them to come to you and check you out. So a mixture of the two of those is probably ideal. The one thing you don't want to do is take advantage of your Akkie's curiosity with you when you're in the enclosure and being present. And that will lead us into number 3, guys. So a big don't at number 3, don't rush. I know everyone wants to get to that bond, that trust with their Ackie where they can pick them up, interact with them, and it just be fantastic all the time, and you really got this nice relationship established. But you do need to be patient and not rush. It's so important. When they start checking you out, when you're being present in the enclosure, you don't want to immediately start going to grab them and stuff. You want to go through a period where they come up to you, maybe sit on your hand, maybe check out your hand by licking it and stuff like that, to taste it, to smell it, such like that. that. So you want to go through that period before starting to try to pick them up, and that could be several weeks, so you do want to make sure you do that. And if the process is taking longer than you would like, don't get impatient. Don't give in to force handling. You're just going to set yourself back so much. You make a lot of unseen progress with Ackies, so they will come around eventually. Just don't rush. Speaking of being impatient, we're about 20 away from being at 3,500 subs, so I'd really appreciate if you subscribe. Definitely check that out in the lower right hand corner. Hit that bell as well for the latest updates. Thanks, guys. Back on topic, I know that there are situations where it's kind of hard not to rush and not to force handle, because I did kind of briefly talk about this in number 5. If you have to give them medicine or you want to check them out, you should be doing some almost routinely checks of their body, just making sure there's no cuts or anything you should worry about, making sure the sheds are good. So there are some times when it's hard to not just go and grab them, especially when they're so fast and so untrusting at a young age. That's kind of what I've been going through with the baby male that I talked about. But just like I'm trying to readjust and be a little bit more patient and nice about picking them up, you should in that context as well. Obviously, at some point, you do need to get them to be able to check them out, do whatever you need to do. So you can only go for so long before trying to really go for the grab. But try to be as patient as possible and try to make it as positive as possible. Maybe use feeding on tongs or something to get them in your hand or something like that. Just try to make it as positive as you possibly can. That's what's important. Let's go on to number 2 on our list, guys. Number 2 is a very important do you need to be aware of. Your approach matters a ton. Even as adults, where they're a lot more trusting and they do rebound a lot quicker than babies, how you approach them can really send them into titsy. Titsy, is that what it is? Or tizzy, that's what it is. And for babies, approaching them in the wrong way could really set back the whole taming process you worked on by months even. They could really not trust you if you approach them the wrong way. So what's the wrong way? Coming overhead is generally not the best way to go about it, since that reminds them of birds of prey, which is not a good thing if you're a lizard, especially a baby lizard. Also, you want to be slow in your motions. Coming in really quick, that's just going to freak them out because they don't know what's coming at them. You want to be slow. You want them to be able to realize it's you, smell it's you, pick that up. So you want to come in slow and sort of on the same level as them. When you're just starting out, when I say slow, I mean like that slow. And like I said in the Tegu taming tricks video I did, interacting with them somehow when they're eating is somewhat of a good thing to do. Like I said, positive reinforcement is very powerful. Now, they are a lot more untrusting than Tegus when it comes to interacting with them, so even while eating and distracted, they might not be so enthusiastic about you trying to be around them. But maybe just laying your hand next to them while they eat, that'll create a positive association, so maybe try that. Let's get on to our final, number 1 in the list. Here it is. Ending the list with a don't. You don't want to remove them from the enclosure when going through the taming process. Maybe later on in the taming process that could be somewhat acceptable, but I kind of touched on this before, although I really never went totally in depth on it. And the number 1 reason being that you don't want to do this is because Ackies are very crazy when untrusting. They're incredibly fast. They know how to wiggle and move to make it loose in your hand, and it's just very hard to control them. And if they get out of your hand when they're not too fond of you being around you and they're frightened, they're going to take off, and good luck trying to catch one of them. It is so impossible sometimes handling the baby male Ackie I have. He just wiggles around. It's just so hard. He knows how to get out of my hands. So you got to be careful with that, and it stresses them out anyway, so you probably shouldn't be holding them in the first place at that time in the taming process. More importantly, you want them to get adjusted and used to you in their environment, in their enclosure, in their home. That's where they feel safe, and if they feel safe with you in their enclosure, then that's a good plus, especially because you're probably going to do most of your interaction when you're in their enclosure with them. So that's very important. Obviously, you want to get them adjusted to you outside the enclosure, because a lot of reptiles, when they're in a new environment outside their home, they're going to be a little iffy, and that could send them into sort of a different mindset where they're a little less trusting. So you do want to work on that too, but it's definitely most important to get them used to you in their own home. So for those 2 reasons, because they can be hard to handle in the early parts of the taming process, and because you want to get them used to you in their own home and environment, you probably don't want to pick them up too much and take them outside of their enclosure early on. Later in the process though, when they get adjusted to you more so, you probably can start doing that. Let's recap, guys. At number 5, we have don't force handle. It's important to not force handle them. That's the worst thing you could do probably when taming an Ackie. You want them to come to you and feel like that's their decision they're making. Force handling them will really break up the trust and any progress you've made. Number 2, be present. You want to be active in their environment, in their enclosure. Show you can exist in the same space together without it always being stressful for them. And that's going to get them used to you and your scent quicker and quicker the more you do it. So definitely do that. That's a strong number 4. Number 3, don't rush. That's very important. I know you really want to get that bond with your guy, but you're only going to do that if you're patient with them and you trust them to come to you and check you out eventually. Sometimes you're going to take way longer than other people. Sometimes other people form bonds with their Ackies right away. Remember, these guys can be individuals, but it's very important that you don't get ahead of yourself and you trust in the process, and they'll come to you eventually. Number 2, do watch your approach. You want to make sure you approach them on the same level at a slow speed that's going to make them not freak out. If you do it not that way, they're going to freak out. They're not going to trust you as much, so make sure you do that. And lastly, number 1, like I said, you don't want to take them out of their enclosure, especially early on in the process. They are incredibly wiggly and hard to handle, and if they get away, good luck catching them, and you want to get them used to you in their own environment. So definitely do that, especially early on, and eventually you'll be able to take them outside their enclosure. Okay guys, so that wraps up today's video. Let me know if you have any tips that you saw worked well with Ackie monitors or monitor lizards in general, and we'll see if they can apply to Ackies. Let me know if you enjoyed this series as well so far, and what else you would like to see taming wise. Let's get on with a couple announcements before wrapping up. Welcome to our newest supporter, Kat and Rick. I really appreciate you supporting the Patreon. I want to thank Mahan's Bioactive Reptiles as well, Brian B, Angela L, David T, Herb M. Thanks so much for supporting the channel. You guys too can support the channel for as little as $1 a month. Check the top right for more information. Support the channel in a different way by rocking the Professor Herp merch. I'm wearing my Tongue Out Tuesday today. I haven't gotten the Ackie one yet. I don't know why. I just realized that the other day. I'll be getting that very soon, but Tongue Out Tuesday one's a very popular one, probably the most popular. I have 3 different designs besides this one that's to the left of my head right of your screen. Check the Teespring link in the description for more information. Okay guys, so remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you Wednesday with the next video. Remember guys, if you didn't see the end of Friday's video, I am posting Monday and Wednesday now, so that's our future schedule. Alright guys, see ya.